We are live on YouTube and LinkedIn. Our topic today is affordable electricity can resolve worldwide poverty. And with us, our friends Ronald Stein, Oliver Hammers, and Steve Curtis. Welcome, my
Thank you.
Well, glad to be aboard.
Glad to be here.
fantastic.
Mhm.
Ronald, me start with you, please. Electricity, in your opinion, is a factor of social inclusion, and the other side of the question, the lack of electricity is a measure of poverty, in your opinion?
Well, definitely. Here in America, we're one of the wealthy countries, and we have tunnel vision. The richest American is richer than 75% of humanity, and about close to 5 billion people on this planet are living on less than $10 a day, and billions are living with little to no access to electricity. And the poor, they can't subsidize themselves out of a paper bag. We in the wealthy countries, we can subsidize anything. And the interesting thing is, hungry countries, they need to pursue reliable and emissions free electricity from nuclear, while the wealthy countries, we focus on subsidizing wind and solar for intermittent electricity. It's the most expensive electricity, but quote, quote, we can afford it, they can't. The developing countries, they're spearheading the shift toward nuclear power. It's the world they need reliable and sustainable electricity because that's crucial for, the wealthy nations focus on weather-dependent wind and solar and so-called renewable electricity. But the choice of nuclear power generation ahead of unreliable renewables, it's driven by their need for dependable, low-emission electricity to meet their growing demand for industrial, mining, and agricultural goods, to produce the growth that they need to do.
If you could compare, Ronald, again with you, natural gas, lack of natural gas or lack of electricity, which one is more important for poverty measurement?
Well, they could probably do without natural gas, but natural gas is one of the ways to generate power, natural gas power plants. But no, electricity, that's what they need. They need inexpensive, reliable electricity. And like I say, we in the wealthy countries, we're going for the most expensive, most unreliable electricity because it's so-called green.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I'm not sure that's is for Steve or for Oliver, but the technique of using nuclear waste to supply electricity demand. The first point is possible, is feasible. How big and how important is this solution?
I'll take that. This is what my ambition's been for the last focused ambition for the last 7 years, and I've been thinking about it a long time. There's a lot of implications to this. To answer your question right up, it's feasible. In fact, there are companies in business today that can do it now. Private companies that are capitalized and ready to go and can do it. So, in fact, it's actually the way power was going to be produced in the United States in the beginning. There's a lot of advantages. For a big one is there's a lot more heat in the cooling on fast reactors, molten salt particularly, and there's no high pressure. You operate these reactors at atmospheric pressure. So there's the manufacture of it is much simpler than that of the large light water reactors, and the economics is just astronomically off the chart. So yeah, the answer is yeah. Not only is it feasible, but if in the United States, if the government got out of the way, they could start tomorrow. They have the capability. It doesn't take much of a supply chain because most of it is off the shelf existing material, and they can move. In fact, they are building one research reactor in a Texas university, Abilene Christian. So they are moving forward.
Yeah, but when you mention nuclear waste, you mean the first passage of a nuclear processes, or how many processes can you take?
Okay, so I'll go through that a little bit. When they burn the light water reactors, light water means that the neutrons are basically thermal, and they can only fission. You can more efficiently fission the U-235 isotope, which is a very small percentage, and fuel maybe 3 or 4%. When you get done, you have about 95% of that material still left in the other isotope that's not as easily fissionable. That's the U-238. When you go into a fast reactor, what you do is use neutrons to essentially breed, which means you add a neutron to the 238, and it'll quickly change into plutonium-239, which is fissile. So now you can use the neutrons to fission that material. So essentially you turn the vast majority of the 95% that wasn't used into a material that can be used and fissioned. And so you basically get very conservatively 30 times more the energy from the original material. And it has to do with the physics of fast reactors, which works better with plutonium. There is an issue with neutron economy. You need enough neutrons to, number one, transform it, number two, fission it. But those problems have been worked out and are not research anymore. They're reality. So you basically can turn the spent fuel we have already mined and already refined into 30 times more energy than it originally produced in the light water reactors. The reason we're not doing that is mostly influential politics that wants to keep the monopolies and the high prices of electricity going from the existing purveyors. And we feel, of course, that should change.
Armando, can I add to that?
Sure, of course.
This 4 billion year old planet has a lot of resources. There's a lot of oil on the planet, a lot of coal, a lot of natural gas, lithium, cobalt, but there is a limit. And the supply chain of extracting that out of the earth while it's not being replenished, in a couple hundred years, we'll drain the earth of all the resources. And this 4 billion year old planet's going to be around in a couple hundred years with or without us. So the idea of basically having no material requirements to meet the supply chain for nuclear, that is really exciting.
Interesting. Oliver, I have a tricky question for you. So allow me to do
Bye, Oliver.
Yeah. Oliver, what's the probability? And the tricky part is on a scale from 0 to 100, that nuclear energy become, the frequent energy source. What's your perception about that?
Oh, I would say 100% likelihood that the future will include nuclear energy. And everybody is, that means everybody, meaning the different countries, is trying to figure out the best way how they want to get there. To the future of nuclear energy. There are discussions in Germany even to go to, back to nuclear, but utilizing the new types of nuclear energy systems and not go over with the light water reactors. So everybody, I think, is thinking about it. They also think about what they do with their already accumulated nuclear waste, and they know that fast reactor technology exists, and it's not a secret. We're not talking about the secret nuclear source here. It's very well known everywhere, and it just takes a certain engagement and maybe trust and faith to just walk in that direction and produce reliable, clean energy for their citizenships, right? And every country is looking into it. Some are more hesitant than others, but I think it's going to come. You can't beat nuclear in energy production. I just saw statistics. The German nuclear power plants, which were light water reactors that actually created that nuclear waste that we're talking about here, they produced electricity at 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That was their production rates, at the official numbers, 2.5 pennies. And no wind and solar is even close to it, even though they get billions in subsidies, right? So you eventually people figure out that the subsidy model is not perfect for energy production. We want to have the free market economy drive that, and nuclear will beat out everybody in the pricing, right? So
That's a good point. Is it applicable for every country? What are the variables that you can consider to separate countries that could apply nuclear and could not apply nuclear? What are the variables?
well, it does require some upfront investment, right, from these countries. So it depends on can they get loans from the World Bank, for example, right? That's kind of if the World Bank decides, no, I don't want to, we don't do nuclear, right? It's a lot harder to get than if they get, if they get kind of a more, let's say, a willing bank to upfront costs for the production and building of those facilities. Now, the good thing is the new nuclear facilities that they can start off with are smaller. They're also less expensive, and they probably better fit the needs of various countries because you can set up your own grid. Like you don't need to have a big national grid to put those power plants on. You can have subgrids for regions, and there you can deploy smaller nuclear power plants. They might not be as efficient as the big ones, but it's better than praying for the sun to shine and the wind to blow to get some light and energy right into the regions. And for building up economies that require electricity, you have to have reliable electricity. You cannot just work when the sun shines or the wind blows, right? It's just ridiculous when you try to build economy around that, right? So,
and Ronald, free private investment initiatives or government initiatives, what is the best one, and how can we consider the best solution for developing countries, for instance?
Well, I think we all know that when government goes into business, it's prelude to disaster. It's free enterprise. It's going to make the world go round. It's developed. The wealthy countries have been developed by free enterprise, and government is trying to regulate it, to control it, but the government cannot do it. And it would take a lot of imagination to see free enterprise versus government regulation spreading to the world. And running water, sanitation, the modern appliances that we find in our way, these are needed in poverty centers in South Asia, Africa, the Pacific, East Asia. It just takes leadership, and leadership is coming from free enterprise. The special interest groups in the wealthy countries that are behind all the subsidies, they do not support the diverse 8 billion on this planet. The path is clear. There's no shortcuts. There's no skirting around the elephant in the room that policymakers refuse to discuss, which is the path to reliable and sustainable electricity.
Yeah, Armando. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, any sort of just a transition, it needs to result in proportionate increases in units of production that the world needs to live. The standards that those employing, the standards that we like to live. It's just crazy. Where billions of impoverished people are given the light to shine, whatever talent we have in the world, and for that they need a spark, and the spark's going to be free enterprise.
Yeah. Let me add a dimension to that. The reactor companies that are coming out now and marketing reactors are actually marketing power. They're going to go in and make a power purchase agreement at a certain price to a customer. So there's really not a lot of upfront money that's needed to be had with that model. And the recycling people are looking at that model as well. So they'll go into a country and find out what level of power they need and where they need it. They'll design the system that fits for them. They'll upfront the money to put the thing in as long as they get a 30 or 40-year agreement to purchase so much power at a certain price. And just to give you an example, when Bill Gates is contemplating using the 3 Mile Island reactor, he's looking at 10 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour for subscribing all the power that that reactor can produce. And there is a huge demand for that business because you can make a lot of money. Like Oliver pointed out, 2.5 cents, retail, just for a regular light water reactor. And if they can sell it for 10 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour, that's a pretty staunch incentive, and it would give people a reason to want to invest the money to build the reactors and operate them.
Steve, probably he is looking for energy security for his business and let's say long-term energy independent of other sources.
Lots of energy. That's the problem now with the data centers. They need lots and lots and lots of energy. First of all, the grid is not big enough to supply that energy. Second of all, a gigawatt reactor like the 3 Mile Island reactor would directly supply a data center. So they don't need a grid. They can put a data center directly connected to a reactor, and that's a perfect suspension. You could do that with desalination plants and things like that. And there's process heat. These fast reactor, the hotter reactors, the high temperature gas and the molten salt reactors have higher heat, so you can use actually process heat without even turning it into electricity. So you, like Ron said, you have this free market enterprise system that will design exactly what the customer needs instead of forcing them to buy whatever is available on the monopoly that exists. And the implications are huge.
Yeah, Bill Gates, he needs electricity 24/7 around the clock. Can't get that from wind and solar.
He needs a reliable energy in all time.
Yes.
All the time. Oliver, electrification may have different motivations. China, for instance, I suppose the electrification for EVs are based on the lack of oil for gasoline and for diesel. Is it correct, this vision?
Well, I think again you have to look at your needs and diversification of solutions when depending on what is lacking. If you don't have oil, for example, let's say South Africa, right? They couldn't get oil for quite a while. They developed the methods with the Fischer-Tropsch process to make their own crude oil that they then could refine for their applications, right? Which is, of course, not as easy as just pumping it out of the ground and using it, right? So, but effectively, you have a problem and you find a solution. If you don't have gasoline and you want to use electric cars, it is like you use solar panels when you're not on the grid. Let's say you're in the middle of nowhere and there are no power lines. Solar energy, maybe wind energy, and some battery storage might be the only way for you to actually get power to the place where you are at that time. But it doesn't mean that you kind of expand that to an industrial nation. Besides data centers, pretty much any type of manufacturing needs electricity 24/7. Let's say you use aluminum production, copper production, all these facilities, they cannot run on wind and solar, right? They run some of these facilities and factories run 24/7, right? That's kind of the way for them to be competitive. They don't just work 8 hours, shut down, come back the next day, right? So in order to stay competitive on the world market, you want to have a factory that runs around the clock and produces something like, in Germany, some of the companies have 4 shifts a day. So you can calculate it's about 6 hours per shift. And then let's say some overlap and so on. So you want to have people working around the clock. Now you can also employ a lot more that way, right? You have 4 times as many employees. But it's still more efficient and makes your products more competitive on the global market. And the basis for you to do that is electricity 24/7. So depending on where what you want to do, is it just replacing gasoline and drive electric cars, or is it something you have actual factories that need to run 24/7 that you effectively have enough electricity for those days as well, right? It's a perception, and EVs are not really, that great to apply everywhere, right? I mean, you can say Norway, for example, I think they have 95% EVs, right?
Only Californians can have EVs.
but and even though Norway has I think the most EVs per capita in the world, everybody still has a gasoline car, right? It's not that they just have only
The driver, yeah.
So it's where the subsidies are coming from and how you apply that. Do you have enough electricity? Because you cannot look in Germany. I remember one example. If you want to charge an EV, the power lines are not there. The infrastructure is not there. Let's say you would have enough electricity, you can't get it to where you live. They say, oh, you can charge 2 EVs at the same time in one street. So now when the people say, well, who decides who kind of charges their EVs? I say, well, you have to get with your neighbors and agree on a schedule. Can you imagine for the whole street to determine who can charge their EV when? It's just not feasible, right, those ideas. And that's why it's not very well accepted. Now,
That's right.
right.
Ronald, in Brazil, you have two very different parts of Brazil. I mean, for the south part, the richer part is we use hydro energy, hydro to generate electricity, and natural gas power plants as backup. So this is the base of our electricity in the south part of the country. But in the northwest, the poverty is something relevant there, and they use sometimes diesel generators to generate electricity for people there. What do you recommend to the northwest part of Brazil in terms of try to change the situation of diesel generators to what?
Well, as I mentioned before, let free enterprise take it from there, because they'll see a need and free enterprise will come up with a solution to meet that need. But when you have the government, mandating the direction we're going to go, Oliver was talking about Germany and EVs. Germany was the first country to go green, and they shut down nuclear and mandating EVs. Well, EVs are not that popular in Germany, and recently, a couple of days ago, Volkswagen announced they're closing 3 plants, and here in the United States, Ford, they're losing billions of dollars. And I'm just waiting for the point in time when they're going to fess up and say, we're going to stop this bleeding and, shut down some facilities, because, you're mandating something to society that society doesn't want. Let free enterprise serve what society wants.
Well, there is one bright spot in the United States, and if you can compare it to the early days of light water reactors when the nuclear navy started powering their ships, that's the model that was used by the reactors on land after that. And that was very successful until about the mid-70s when politics took over. Same thing may be happening today, because the military strategic bases, all of them want a nuclear reactor on their site to power their bases, exclusive of the grid. And most of that's because they want to make sure they have a continuous supply of power. So they're not waiting for NRC, they're not waiting for DOE. They're moving forward on this with their own initiative, and they're way advanced, and they're using private companies to do this. So they will have reactors on the order of about 1 to 10 megawatts mostly, which is about 10,000 houses equivalent. But that's about the right size for a military base. So they'll be installing those reactors just as soon as they can get them, and they can do it without having to wait for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to approve them, because the military has the purview that they can do that. They're also looking at these reactors for battle. If you put a 7, 8, 10 megawatt reactor in the front lines, you don't have to haul water. You don't have to haul gasoline for diesel. And in modern battlefield, most of the people die in the process of moving equipment up front. So the military is way ahead of the civil side on this, at least the civil marketing side on this. And I think they might be dragging the rest of the country into it, kicking and screaming in the very near future. But whatever it takes, we need to be able to see this. But it is very feasible, and they see a huge advantage to it.
Mhm.
You know, a
Oliver,
couple of decades ago, there was a TV series called MASH about mobile, hospitals, near the front lines. And my wife and I, we like to watch reruns. And when I'm watching it, these places are out in the middle of nowhere, and the hospitals are operating 24/7. And I'm just thinking, boy, if they had a nuclear reactor, they'd have power.
Oliver, Ronald mentioned sometimes political issues that, let's see, as constraints to electrification and things like that. Stephen says more related to financial issues. He mentioned today some parts of financial issues. How do you see this balance of political and financial issues to make these things happen for the poverty people in the world?
Well, I think the problem is, as long as you have politicians involved in trying to steer certain things in whatever direction they feel like is of the greatest interest to them, you never really get a good free market economy out of it. Right? They steer solar and wind in Germany, and it's when you look at the September numbers for Germany in the wind and solar energy, they paid about $2.6 billion or euros to the owners of the solar panels in Germany, to the mass producers.
As subsidies?
Well, that's kind of was a negotiated rate. That's
Oh.
what they get from the government. But the income was only 144 million. So like 5%. In a free market economy, that wouldn't work. You cannot pay 5% of a product cost, right? These people that would operate the solar panels would say we cannot make it work at 5%. That's why they get these massive subsidies, right? And so the politicians in this whole scheme of things, I would say, they are kind of they're getting lobbied a lot. When look, when the solar industry, and I think the solar and wind industry in Germany gets about 20 billion euros a year for the electricity that they produce, even though they get it when they don't produce electricity. And so they have a lot of incentive, right? 20 billion euros incentives to kind of expand that type of racket, right? To kind of make money on not producing anything. Everybody would be kind of happy to get paid when they don't have any to produce anything. So that would work for any country. It is just that the rich countries have enough money that they can fund those follies. And the politician that get their benefits through working with these type of companies are kind of the ones who support this, right? And even though it financially doesn't make any sense and everybody's just shaking their head, it is to the point that in the past you would have kind of comedians make fun of politicians, what they say or what they do. Today, at least in some countries, you just take what they actually do and you think you cannot make that up. That's already a comedy in itself, right? What they do. And so that's from the political side, it's extremely harmful to find a free economy, free market solution to energy and electricity production, even though it makes a lot of sense, even though nuclear is the safest there is, the lowest cost, the most reliable, but they go with all kinds of stuff. And you sometimes wonder what these politicians pursue. It's not, I mean, it looks like now it is becoming political suicide in Germany because the people finally wake up and start to vote the other way. But it takes a while, right, for the people to realize that.
Yeah, that's right.
Armando, I think another way of saying that, if wind and solar depended on free enterprise to finance it, there wouldn't be any wind and solar. It's not a business model that works. And like I say, you're spending a lot of money to build these generating systems, but they don't work most of the time, so they wouldn't be able to generate revenue. So the expense is, like I said, when you got unlimited subsidies, with the government direction, you can build anything. But subsidizing it, take a look at the 6 billion people living on less than $10 a day. They can't subsidize themselves out of a paper bag. They'll never have electricity. Wait for the government.
And California, Ronald, is growing in terms of electricity every year, or
Our imports are growing, yes.
importing?
Yeah, we
Oh,
shut
my
down coal-fired power plants in California so we can import electricity generated by coal in Wyoming.
Wow.
So it's crazy. Yeah, California, we import more electricity than any other state in the country. We're importing about 30% of our needs because we keep shutting down reliable power, government regulations and mandates. Yeah, it's a disaster.
It's a problem of energy security, of course, of the state.
Lack of security.
Lack of security. But all United States is the same, or only California and other few states?
Well, everybody's going to net zero, and net zero, they're going to start following California.
But you're seeing some switches in the attitudes now, because the basic bottom line truth that nobody wants to admit is that people want electricity, and they want it all the time, and they want it as cheap as they can get it. And they've been used to getting that for, I guess you could make 7 or 8 decades, an easy 7 or 8 decades case for that. And so they want to keep doing it. So if you get right down to push to shove, if you ask the customer what they want electricity. If they can't get it with clean energy, they'll get it with dirty energy. They'll get it any way they can get it. And the fact is that with data centers bidding the price up so high, these data centers say they'll pay 5 to 6 times the going retail rate for electricity if they have to get it. You can see a train wreck coming. You can see people bidding this electricity up to $1 a kilowatt hour if we don't produce anymore. And they just can't produce and ship electricity on the current grid anymore. It's maxed out. So now you're in a situation where you've waited till the last minute. Now there's no way to respond to it. So the data centers are going outside of the grid and saying we're going to get our own electricity, and they are making these deals with nuclear power. They're not making deals with natural gas or coal or renewables. They're making it with nuclear to supply them these power. And so they have to work through the political system. But my prediction is once the data centers start ramping up the demand for this, I think they'll find a way to get the government to capitulate. And I think you'll start seeing these reactors being built quite readily.
But Steve, what comes first? The capacity of people in a country, let's say north part of Africa, a country in north part. What comes first? The capacity of people to pay for electricity, or a private company to invest there and to receive money later, or from government? How do you see this equation for?
To be honest with you, the rest of the world is farther ahead than the United States is on this. Russia's already in Africa. Russia's already exporting reactors to Africa. They're busy fighting a war, but they're still busy exporting reactors to Africa as fast as they can. And like they said, the model is we're not selling reactors, we're selling power. So if they see an area, wherever it is, that they can see a market for a certain level of power over 10, 20 years, they'll make a deal that you're buying this power for this much money, and we'll supply the power. We'll take care of the reactor, we'll build it, we'll operate it, and we'll just guarantee you this power for this price. And that's, I think, what is attractive to poor countries, because they don't have to put any money up front. And they have to pay a price. Now, my prediction with we start doing fast reactor recycling, there's 270 years of U.S. power sitting on the reactor sites right now. And if you finally find a solution to your spent fuel problem, you're going to want to probably burn up and dispose of this stuff as fast as you can. And bear in mind that any other reactor technology that's not recycling the spent fuel is making more of it. So there's essentially an unlimited supply of this fuel that's going to be into the future just because of other reactors that are operating. So if you want to get rid of this as fast as you can, you're going to want people to use it as fast as they can. And that would drive a huge supply of it just with a regular market. And the technology is not that complicated. There are tricks to the trade, but they've solved them all. And private enterprise will be responsible for making that happen. And people talk about the cost all the time. The cost is irrelevant. In a free enterprise system, people are going to buy whatever's the best deal for them. So if you're too expensive, you're not going to be in the market. And I think they use that as a facade to try to keep their prices high for the current product that they're producing. Because they know that if nuclear power can't compete, then people will buy something else. And so it's irrelevant, all these arguments they make for it. But the truth is, if people can see a way to buy power, they'll do it.
Ronald, what a less developed country should do to be attractive for investments in electricity?
To be attractive, well, I know the reality is, free enterprise is already meeting their needs, because take a look at coal-fired power plants. The United States has around 200, and we're trying to regulate them and carbon capture and clean up our act to go net zero. Well, there's 2,000 more power plants, coal-fired power plants, in those developing countries, because they have a need, and they've got inexpensive coal. It's abundant, it's reliable, and that's the only electricity they can get and can afford. So free enterprise is basically meeting their needs, and will continue to meet their needs. And if we can come up with a way to give them even less expensive electricity, reliable and continuous, from nuclear, you get more and more people around the world. Get them out of poverty, give them sanitation, give them, water filtration. And, like I say, we live in a tunnel vision here in the developing countries.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, going to the conclusions, let's see if you can help me. The proposal for Ronald is to move the government Nielsen to a country in Africa, to be president of a country in Africa, to be attractive for electricity investments. What do you think about that?
You want to get rid of Governor Newsom?
Yeah.
I'm all for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, again, it depends on the country and the situation. As we already said before, you let those companies figure out how they can help, right? And because it's a free market economy approach, you don't want the governments dictate
Rules.
the details. They can give the framework, and they say, okay, this is within those means you can operate here, and this is kind of what we want to do, and so on. But the details should be left for the companies, and they should bid, right? They're different reactor companies. I think there are dozens and dozens of companies that work on different solutions, and they might have different price points and so on for how they deliver and produce electricity. But ultimately, it's almost like buying a car, right? You kind of figure out which car you want, and you go to the car company or the dealers, that have the car that meets the needs and the expectations that you have, right? And you want to have something similar for the electricity production. That's why just a big power plant, big nuclear power plant, doesn't help when you have extreme costs for long transmission lines. Right? Then think about Brazil. You put one power plant in Rio, and then the rest of the country gets from Rio transmission lines to every. It's just not feasible, right? You want to regionalize it. You want to break it down
No
in
doubt.
subnets. You want to have smaller reactors in different areas.
Different
So
areas, yeah.
that's exactly how you want to approach it, right? And everybody should benefit. Ultimately, the electricity has to be a cost that it's affordable for people. And once it's affordable and they can build their businesses around it, that's when prosperity follows. Clean water follows, prosperity follows. And so the core idea is low cost electricity to stimulate economic growth all over the world, and especially in the poorer countries that desperately need it.
Yep. Okay, let's go to the conclusions. I would like to suggest a phrase for each one about worldwide poverty based on lack of electricity. Starting with Ronald, how can you say or advise? What do you want?
I think the title of the op-ed we produced says it all. Affordable electricity can resolve worldwide poverty, and it just takes leadership. Free enterprise leadership, not government directions or mandates.
Mm-hmm. Good, very good. Oliver?
Yeah, I would say that nuclear energy as a solution to solve energy poverty globally, and it's something that is worthwhile pursuing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Okay, the way I look at it, you have a choice. You can get penny a kilowatt hour electricity, or you can get dollar a kilowatt electricity power. I think people would choose the penny a kilowatt hour electricity, but the only thing that can deliver that is competition and plentiful fuel. And I see the only way to do that is recycling the existing repository of spent fuel that we have, not reprocessing it, but directly recycling it in fast reactors. That technology can be online quickly if you just get the restrictions out of the way. That can happen soon.
Perfect. Fantastic. These three guys participate on our podcast today, Ronald Stein, Oliver Hammers, and Steve Curtis. Thank you so much, guys. It was a great pleasure for me. I learned a lot with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy days.
All right.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.